My name is Maria Barnes, and I'm the chapter president of Access Lunchtime User Group. Today, we are going to be talking about general tips and tricks for the beginning developer. I am joined today by Crystal, aka Strive for Peace. She is a longtime Access MVP and also has some learning websites available. We'll post those on the last slide. And I am also an MVP. I'm a much newer MVP than Crystal, but I've been working with Access for a long time as well. So let's start here, and I am going to do a joint screen display here. I'm using the Northwind database that is available for download as samples here today. I have added a couple things to it from various presentations and stuff. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about the different objects in Access. And I'm also going to say that I don't know where you are all at as far as in your developer stage. So I imagine there's going to be some of you that some of these tips and tricks are old hat. So please just bear with us while we go through those. I promise you will probably pick up one or two tricks, even if you have developed for a while from today's presentation. So we have different types of objects in Microsoft Access, and there's really 4 basic types. There's a few others as well, but the basic types are tables, queries, forms, and reports. And this is just a little bit of a breakdown of what are the differences. So when you actually store data, you are storing it in a table. A query allows you to pull from multiple tables. You can sort, you can add criteria, and that kind of thing. So, you can do that just in one table through like a Datasheet view, but a query allows you to have a more structured form of manipulating the data and seeing the pieces that you want in the way you want it. Forms are something that you are used to seeing probably. That's where your user interface is. You can do the famous CRUD, add or create, update, or delete information from a table or a query through the form user interface. And then finally, a report is a pretty way to format your data so that you can display it, you can group it or sort on it. You can have different levels of that so that you can do some number crunching and get the data that you want out of your database. Crystal, do you want to talk about this section or do you want me to talk about it?
On the table design? Sure, I'll jump in for a minute. On naming, everybody has their own convention, their own way, but it is important to have some kind of a convention. Don't just use names because that's what the column was called when you imported it from Excel. And of course, also when you're importing from Excel, you also need to generally normalize the data. But there's a couple simple rules when you're thinking of a good name. Make it concise yet descriptive. Start with a letter. Always start with a letter, A through Z. And you should avoid spaces and special characters. Underscore is okay, but don't start with that. And numbers are okay in your names. However, a lot of times if you have a number in your name, it means your data isn't very well normalized. You're allowed to use them though, but don't put numbers at the beginning because that can really bite you. And back to you, Maria.
We did have a comment that my screen is showing 2 windows, PowerPoint and Access, and that is by design. So I'm trying to both keep our outline on the left side of the screen and do the examples as we go through here on the right side. So that is by design. Thanks, Crystal. That was great advice. Going into actually creating a table and designing a table and some tips and tricks on that. you will find that the create interface is on the ribbon under create, and we have different sections of this. The table sections are right here, and the default is this one here, which is to create a new blank table. So that is an interface so that you can actually add a type of a field through the click drop-down box. You can even enter data in there. Once you add one, like if you were to put a short text, you get another one over here. So that's one way to make a table through that interface. There's also the table design mode, which allows you to specify the fields in kind of a top-down approach, as opposed to across like this, where you can specify the field name, like ID, and then the data type, etc. And there are some quick and dirties as well. For example, if you have a table here that you're working on, let's see if I can delete this one, maybe. Then you can do something like take an Excel spreadsheet that you already have, for example, and copy the field names and the data from that, and then paste them as fields, and that will create that table complete with the structure for you in the names of the fields. And it does give you a warning. Do you really want to do that? But then I do advise you, if you're going to use a format like this, and you might ask, why did I not do an import? Well, if you notice that Excel spreadsheet had a header line. So instead of taking this header line here and deleting that first, I just copied and pasted the data using this method. I think it's quicker in some way, in sometimes, but then it's a good idea to actually take your table into design mode and then take a look, because when you do something like that, Microsoft Access makes the best guess from the data that you're pasting. And, you might not want the short text to be, I'm going to close the property sheet so you can see a little more here down by the table design details. You might not want it to be 255, or you might not want this cost to be a number type. You might want, instead of a number, you might want currency or something like that. So, I do recommend that you take a look at the design after you do something about copy and paste. Just going to follow up on our chat here. Leslie was talking about field names. Yes, I don't know that Crystal specifically said that, but...
No, I totally forgot, which is a really big thing to leave out.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Leslie. Be careful about your field names. It's not a good idea to use names for your fields that can be what you might call a reserved word, like name or page or date or something like that was examples Leslie gave. I'm sure that there are others.
Yeah, there's more than 2,500 of them. I love that link that I put in there, Alan Brown's page. He also has an issue checker database that you can download, and then you can browse. You can open it up. You can browse to a database that you want to check, and it will tell you all the reserved words that you're using, whether they're field names or table names or some other kind of name.
Yeah, and my advice to stay away from those is, instead of, like, even cost, right? I don't care for that as a name. What cost, If this is the flavors table, then make it be flavor cost. Flavor cost is never going to be a reserved word, but cost might be. That kind of thing, adding a little bit more description to your field name is a great idea. And it makes it more readable. Suppose you were joining a flavors table with a table of a different sort that also had a cost. Well, if you have two costs in there, you and you're looking at some query that has both in them, you don't know which cost you're talking about. But if you name one flavor cost and one, whatever else cost, then you know in your query what you're dealing with. You don't have to worry about table names or renaming things in a query. Let's see, what else? Primary key, it's a great idea to have one in each table. You see here it indicated with the key. This one was a default create, but if you create a table like this, you see that the key does not automatically get set, but you can set it by right-clicking and choosing primary key. And that should be something that's unique. It doesn't have to be a number or an auto number. It could be a name, but I like auto numbers. They're cleaner to link to and index and that kind of thing. But there are instances, especially if you have, like, say, a lookup table or something like that, where you might want a text field or something as the primary key. So just make sure that it's unique. Crystal, do you want to talk about indexes?
Can I jump in real quick, Maria?
Yeah.
On the ID, Access always tells us the field name is ID for primary key auto number, but that also, just as Maria said, to qualify a cost, you would want to say like customer ID or what kind of an ID it is.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Like this maybe should be flavor ID instead of just ID. And that way when you're linking up different tables, it's much more clear what you're doing. All right, let's talk about indexes.
You want to open up just a table that has indexes?
A different table? Yeah. Let's talk about this one maybe. Sure, it has indexes.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure that's on the...
So the lightning bolt, she's clicking on the lightning bolt icon on the design ribbon. This is a great example because it has a bunch of indexes we don't need. Can you make that indexes window taller, Maria? Thanks, Maria. Awesome. When you pick up a book and you want to find a particular page, you turn to the back of the book and you look it up in the index, and you very quickly see some pages that you can look for that information on. So a database makes indexes for tables the same way. It creates indexes so that when somebody's trying to narrow down to certain records or a specific record, it can use an index and find that page, so to speak, faster. By default, Access builds an index every time it sees a field with ID in the name, or code in the name, or key in the name, or num, N-U-M, in the name. So it automatically builds all these indexes, which I always, and when Maria gets to the options section, we'll see where you can get Access to stop doing that, but I always get it to stop. Will you highlight the primary key index, Maria? That's probably the only index. Click on the row selector maybe. That's probably the only index that this table needs, because any other index that it needs, if you enforce a relationship with referential integrity, a hidden index will be created, and you won't be able to actually see it here. Although sometimes it does use these indexes. But why is it not okay to just have a zillion indexes? Well, every single time you update information, the indexes need to be updated as well. So for performance reasons, you only want to have indexes on fields that you actually need to increase performance for searching. It's a really good idea to keep an eye on the indexes, and over the lifetime of a table, you can only have 32 of them. So if you delete them, that number is gone. You've used up one of your 32 that you're allowed to have in the lifetime of a table. Also, it's silly to create an index on a field that's 255 characters, which is the default for a text field, because I've heard and I believe that 220 characters is the limit for an index. So if I'm going to index a text field, I'll normally make it 200 or less, just because I might combine that field with another field. And like a long integer is only 4 bytes. You're pretty safe adding a 200 character text field to a long integer field and making a multiple field index. But indexes are really important to keep your eye on. And the fact that all these indexes are created and beginners have no idea why, well, I'm just telling you right now, you probably don't need them either. I would just delete a lot of those indexes. So, yeah, that's my little spiel on indexing.
Yeah, and just for clarity, if you are designing a table like this, and you have the table started like we started here, take a look before you even save it for the first time. Take a look at this value here, indexed yes or no, and make sure that if you don't want it to be indexed, that is set to no. Now, these happen to not have that ID indicator or something that triggered it to be added. But since you have a limit, it's a great idea to not create them from start. So if you change the index to no from the get-go and then save, then you haven't used up one of your potential quantities for the life of the table.
Right, because those indexes are only saved when you save the table. Would you click on flavors, your short text field, Maria? I'd like to point something out. So people say, how do you know that I imported this from an Excel spreadsheet? I'll say, well, because look at the format property. It has an @ sign in it, which should be deleted. I don't really know why. Excel puts, the format there, but if it creates a text field, it's not a good idea to keep that @ sign in the format, and it also makes the field size really big. So, we'd never have a flavor that's 255 characters long, so you always want to change the size, the field size, to something more reasonable.
I actually don't agree with that one, Crystal. For short text, at this point in my table design, I leave them all at 255. The reason is that, it used to be, and I guess there's exceptions. If you have a really, really large table with a lot of fields, I used to shorten them to whatever they needed to be, but I found myself too often then having to lengthen them later. And I just don't find that keeping them at 255 is very detrimental in general practice.
Well, it's really interesting that you say that. I bump my default down to 50, but when you import data, it still makes the default 255 because the wizard doesn't look at your option settings.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that.
But I think 50 is a better size. And also, when you have an index, indexes don't use a dynamic size. They use the full size. So if you have a short text field and you have an index on it, then it's especially important to make that size more reasonable.
Yep. And I am a fan, if you're going to use shorter sizes, to use, I would call them round numbers, things like 10 or 50 or 100, not to be making them 73 or something odd like that.
Great point.
If you're going to bump up the size by a level, do it by a degree of 50 or a degree of 100 or something like that. All right, so let's talk about just a couple other things on tables before we move on. I do want to talk about the lookup. And usually we see those more on a number. So if we're going to have maybe a lookup to order ID or something like that. And we've got the format as a long integer here. You can set up a lookup. You can use, the default is no lookup, which is text box, but you can use a list box or a combo box. Combo box is the most frequent, and you can set up a relationship here. I tend to not use this except for in the case where I'm just going to have entry via table or data sheet. If I'm going to make a form, I generally just do that in the form. And the reason is it's easier to maintain that way, because if you change the table lookup later, it doesn't change the form lookup. But it is there and can be used. And then we also have properties. So I turned that off so we could see, but there is on the property sheet different properties here for the table. And usually I look at that if I'm having a problem. You can occasionally get a filter or a sort that gets saved into your table properties and you don't know it's there. But you can do things with it. For example, you can link child and master. I know that there's one of them here. I think it's the orders. And that's been done, and therefore you can see in the datasheet view here the plus sign, and you can see the table underneath it. That comes from linking those items in the property sheet of the table.
And one thing to note about that also is you need to be careful about that Subdatasheet. I generally turn them off, and the reason why is because when you're on a form and those Subdatasheets aren't even being used, guess what? All those tables are still being opened. And also somebody made a comment that we should also point out. We should always, always, always have a primary key. Is that Dwayne Hookham who said that? It looks like it might be. Anyhow, thanks. Yes, that's another great point. Tables should always have a primary key, and it can be one field or a combination of fields. I like to use auto number, same as Maria.
Yep. All right. On to relationships. Crystal, I'm going to open one up, the relationship window up, and then you can take it from here.
Okay.
So relationships is under database tools. And I'm going to close that just so you can see better, but you tell me what you'd like to do.
Yeah, now that's a pretty ugly relationships window.
Totally agree.
Yeah, Maria, why don't you do this? Just clear the layout. Just show the design toolbar and click that X to clear the layout. And yeah, clear the layout. And now just drag over one table like customers. Drag over or put the customers table on there.
From here.
And now just right click in the customer's header and show all the relationships. Show direct relationships. And now, okay, so this actually is arranged the way that I like to arrange them, with the one on the left and the many on the right. See that line between customers and orders? Now I like to stretch the field list down also so that all the fields show, but it's a good idea to build relationships as you're building your tables. And unlike this example, where customer ID actually in the orders table is linked to the ID in the customers table, I would have called that ID in the customers table customer ID with no space, and I would have called it the exact same thing in the orders table because it's the same piece of information. So after you create the customers, you create the orders, you know they need to be related on that customer ID. So it's a good idea then you just click on the field in the primary table, drag to the field in the related table, and let go. And when you let go, a dialog box pops up, and you can check a little checkbox in there called Enforce Referential Integrity. Why don't you just right-click on that join line, Maria?
On this one?
And go to the properties of the relationship. This is what pops up when you drag a relationship. And unless you have a really good reason not to, you should always enforce referential integrity. And this prevents records from being created in the orders table that don't link to any number in the customers table. This can happen a lot if when you're designing the table, you leave the default value set on 0 for a foreign key. If you don't fill out that foreign key in the related table, it'll make it a 0. And generally, auto numbers don't have a 0 value unless you specifically put one there. So you won't be able to enforce referential integrity a lot of times. And the reason is because you need to clean up your data and get all those zeros out of there.
Good tip. All right. Next is Datasheet.
We had a question on the relationship. What is the disadvantage for Cascade Update? And I would say, well, for an auto number field, there's no reason for it because an auto number can't be changed. But if you have like a natural key where you can change the value, I think using Cascade Update is fine.
I would agree with that. And the Cascade Delete does help you from having orphans. For example, if you have orders and order details, if you delete an order, then the details get deleted along with it. So that's what that does. Not a bad practice. You just need to be aware of what it does so that you're not deleting records that you don't want to.
What I'll often do on a Cascade Delete is I won't keep it on there all the time, but if like I want to delete a bunch of sample data out of a database, then I'll go edit those relationships, turn on Cascade Delete, and then I just have to delete a few records in the main table, and it like goes all over and deletes all the related child data also. But then I take it off the relationship because I think it's better for you to be told you can't delete this record, it has related records. If you specifically want to do that, then go temporarily change the relationship to Cascade Delete. But I think it's a good idea not to leave it on there.
So that's a good point. Just checking the enforce referential integrity really prevents you essentially from having orphans because of the fact that it will tell you can't delete it because there is related data. So that's a very good point. All right, for data sheets, how about if I pull up the invoices like this? Do you want to talk about this one or?
Sure. For Datasheet, I think we were going to switch because I was going to go through a bunch of shortcut keys, but you can do your thing first and then we'll switch.
Sounds good. So the Datasheet, that's the default view when you just double click to open a table. And this looks a little bit like an Excel spreadsheet with the default data filters turned on. And to do navigation, and we've got this highlighted out here, you use this navigation bar here in the bottom left. And this tells you what record you're on. I'm on this row, or if I was on this row, you notice it changes down here to 4 of 35. 35 would be the number of records or rows that we have here. And you can use the arrows to go to the next record or the previous record. You can use the far-sided arrows to go to the first or the last. You can use the little star to create a brand new record. This one actually, you can also click on this star indicator that does the same thing. And if you wanted to, if you had, say, 500 here and you wanted to go to 200, you can actually type in this and type a number, and then it will go automatically to that row. And notice this is row 15 or record 15, not order ID 15, right? See the difference? Oh, you can do paste in here as well, just like when we were designing a table, you could paste data in here from an external source, and that will work similar to, like if you were in Excel.
Also, another thing about that paste is if you click on the record selector, that asterisk on the bottom, It highlights the row. Let's say you have 2 columns filled out somewhere else in an Excel spreadsheet. So you've selected a range of like 2 columns by 50 rows. All you need to do is rearrange the columns here. So the 2 columns you're going to fill out are in the same order as your range that you're pasting in. And then when you click on that new record selector and paste, it'll just fill out those first 2 columns and create 50 new records for you. Also, I wanted to point out Dwayne made another comment, which is really a good one. Instead of deleting a record, it's a good idea to put an indicator on the record and just mark it as deleted, and then just not show it when you show records that are available, but not to actually remove it from the database.
That would be something done in table design. For example, you could put like a IsActive on there or something like that.
Exactly.
And that is a great idea, Dwayne. I certainly don't use that in all instances, but if we are talking about orders, for example, it'd be a good idea to archive that fact that you had an order, but you maybe didn't fill it. Or maybe there's an order status, and one of the statuses is submitted and then filled or skipped, or, whatever your workflow is, but something so that you have some record of it. Maybe you want to go back to it later or something like that, and then you can do so. And then you use queries for the most part to filter what you really want to see for everyday use.
But I'm going to show you, if you go to AccessUserGroups.org and you go to Tools, then you'll see favorite shortcut keys for Microsoft Access. And you can go to the download section, and I'm just going to open this instead of downloading it. But I'm going to do a real quick, I've got to size this. I already opened it, so it didn't change the size. So I'm just going to make that a little narrower. I'm going to go through a really quick bunch of shortcut keys. So when you're in a table or something, if you press the tab key, you go from field to field. If you're on a form, you go from control to control. Shift tab, you go backwards. Now enter, okay, you go down. I go down, and that's because I changed my defaults to make the enter key move to the next record instead of the next field, which I love to do. So if you want to make a new record, you can just control +. Oops, I did that in the wrong window. I made this bigger. Okay, control- to make that smaller. How about control + over here? And that immediately jumps you down to the bottom to a new record. If I'm on a record, if I'm somewhere on a record, I can do control -, but here it can't be deleted because there's related records. If you press the F2 key, notice as I press F2, I'm just pressing. I'm toggling between selecting the whole value, which is called navigation mode, and just the insertion point, which is called edit mode. In edit mode, I can press the arrow keys back and forth, or the home key to go to the beginning, the end key to go to the end. If I'm in navigation mode and I press the arrow keys, then I move fields at a time. So the behavior changes depending on if you're in edit mode or navigation mode. Zoom, if I press the Shift F2, I get a zoom box, which I can see the whole value here, but maybe over here where I might have a longer comment, I want to zoom it up to see everything because it's not all showing. So you can always use Shift F2 to zoom it, even if you don't see that on the shortcut menu. The builder, I can't demonstrate here, but let me just show you over here. This is a query, which Maria is going to talk about, but this is the builder. I'm using control mouse wheel to make this bigger and smaller, the size in the builder button area. Control F, if I wanted to find something, Control F pops up the find box. Let's say I want to replace a value, Control H does the replace. Now notice find and replace are actually on the same dialog box, so you can switch between them, and notice that you can look in the current field or all of the fields in the current document, the whole field or any part of a field, or just the start. And you can search all. I generally leave it on all, but if you just want to go up or down, you can do that too. Enter and escape. So if you've made some changes, I'm just going to zoom this up, and gosh, I didn't realize I was like leaning on the keyboard. So now I can just press escape, and I didn't actually change anything at all. So the enter key, if you have a dialog box, notice that cancel has a heavier border around it. So if I press enter, the default button will be done. If I also press Control F for find, escape also by default generally does the cancel button. Now in that case, it's kind of unusual that it had cancel as the default button, because usually OK is default and cancel is escape. Save as is really useful if you're on a query. And Maria's going to talk about queries, but F12, that gets you the Save As dialog box. So maybe I made a few changes to some columns and I just want to call this something different now. Then that's a really handy time to use it. When you're doing data entry, let me just go over to a larger field, and I'm going to zoom it up. If I press Control Enter somewhere, that will give me a new line. And a lot of these data entry shortcuts don't work when you're in the zoom box. That one does. So I'm just going to go over here and type a few of these. Didn't mean to go there. If you do a parenthesis, C, parenthesis, and then you tab out, it changes it to a copyright symbol. You can do Control semicolon to automatically get today's date. Let me go to a field or one that has more on it. I'm going to delete this because I don't really want to change my data, even though this is just sample data. Control Shift semicolon is the time. Now, the way to remember that is if you look at your keyboard and you see the colon and you see like a colon between numbers, you always know it's a time. So therefore, it makes total sense that that shortcut would be Control-Shift-colon. And that works in Excel as well. And then date and time both measure the passing of a day, so it makes sense for Control-semicolon to be the date. Now, if I want to put a value in, that's the default value. Like over here on my date added, I actually added this back in 2014. I'm just going to delete. I have a default on date add to automatically put in now, which is the current date and time. So if I wanted to get that default value, Control-Shift-Spacebar. Oops. Control-Alt-Spacebar. Okay, that gets me the default value. That's right now for me. It's 12:45 p.m. I'm just going to escape. Now notice that when I change a record, I guess neither one of us mentioned this, but when you are editing a record, then you'll see a pencil in the record selector area. And when you escape, you undo your change. And sometimes you have to escape twice to actually undo the whole record. Let's say I wanted to write 150 degrees. I could do Alt 248. Let's see. Alt 248. Oh, numlock has to be on. Alt 248 to get the little degree symbol. So if you know what the code is for a character, you can get it in real quickly by Alt plus whatever its code is. If you want to copy a value from above, like let's say this guy's a contractor also, Control Ditto. I'm just going to escape though, because I'm not really going to change it. That works. I call it Control Ditto, but it's Control quote mark. Backspace and delete. A lot of these you can just look down Control X, Control C, Control V, very important for cut, copy, paste. Insert to toggle between type over and insertion mode. If you want to check the spelling in a field or a control, you can press the F7 key to launch the spell checker. For navigation.
So before you do navigation, we do have a question from Leslie asking if there's a way to make access larger like you can in Word or Excel. And I assume she's not talking about just zooming in on one field.
Now, what I did here, I did make, it says you're sharing the screen. I guess you can't. Can you see that? I made this
we can see that
bigger on my data sheet so that it would show up better. There are some places in the options, and Maria, I kind of doubt you're going to have a chance to go into those.
I don't think we're going to have time to get to that.
We're going to have to do a part 2.
Yes, I think so.
The shortcut key handout that I'm just looking at right here, you can download this too and get all these. There's like 7 pages of them. These are my favorites. It's not a complete list of shortcuts though, just the ones I like the best. There are some shortcuts that only work on a data sheet, such as, like, let's say Control Spacebar, that selects the column. Shift Spacebar? Yeah, selects the row, and I think that's the same in Excel. You can also click and you can shift click to select a range of data. And if you had like a range in Excel that was this exact size and you select it over here, you can actually paste into a range, which is really nice. And then for Windows, Alt Spacebar, that just, see up there in the upper right-hand corner, left-hand corner, that just opens the window menu. Now, one thing that I really like, I'm not going to do all these window things, but see how this is just taking up part of the screen? If you press the Windows Shift up arrow, then it maximizes the height. And then at the bottom, another one I use a lot is Windows Shift left or right arrow to move that window over to my other monitor, since I have 2 monitors. So now I'm done with my little whirlwind till we get to forms. You want to take control back, Maria?
Sure. We talked about the data sheet and the different shortcuts. Notice here that we're only on 7 and we have 18. So we're not going to get through everything today, but we'll stop a few minutes before and wrap up at the end here and schedule a part 2 for another time. I don't know if it'll be January. We'll have to see. Oh no, I already have something else scheduled for January. Anyway, queries. Again, back to the create menu here. When you are working with a query design, when you pull that up, there is an add tables as an option. And
I like to just close that thing and drag them from the navigation pane. I guess because it's worked forever and you can still filter over there too. And I kind of think that new way is silly.
Well, I don't know. I guess that's a personal preference, but there is a new add tables. And I don't know that you can see, I see this expand panel to show video in my way, but there's tables, links, queries, and all. I don't like having the link tables in a different spot. That's a comment that I've made. But you can, do a search here. Like if you only wanted something with orders, you can double click on something or you can drag it over to put it in. And like Crystal said, you can also do the same thing from this table size. You can drag order details over here, something like that. So there's an easy way and a more modern way to set up your tables in your query rather than that silly old ad where you right-clicked on it and you showed tables or something like that. I don't know. I didn't like it. So by the way, the demo here today is using Office 365. I happen to be on the I think the insider version. But, most of this stuff doesn't really change very much from month to month. So if you've got a normal Office 365 with monthly or even semi-annual subscription, you're probably seeing almost exactly the same thing here. If you've got one of the older versions, your interface might be slightly different. I like to talk a little bit about field names, and I'm just going to use inventory here as an example. Sorry, I'm just deleting. And here you can right-click on either of these, or you can actually right-click on the corner and it resizes now. I absolutely love that because I just like to see everything, So in this case, was there a comment?
Somebody just wanted to know about how to get the shortcut key handout, so I put a link in there.
Okay, awesome. What was I saying? Okay, a couple things. One thing about spaces, just be aware of them. I actually don't like to name if this was a table, I think this is a query, but I don't like to name fields with spaces in them myself. Some people like it, but I prefer to use the notation where like the character, like if I was going to create quantity sold, there would be no space, but the S would be capitalized so that it was more readable. But if you are going to use something like that in a computation, for instance, you've got a couple fields here and you want where the quantity sold is greater than the quantity on hand in your criteria, you need to make sure that you use brackets. If you don't use brackets, it will not be able to interpret that as a field, and it will treat it as a text string. Basically, it'll put quotes around it.
Yeah, as Phil mentioned that spaces are bad practice, and a big reason is for what you just said. You have to put brackets yourself if your field name contains a space.
Yep. Yeah, and if you work with VBA at all, and you're doing IntelliSense and stuff like that, it's just not as clean. So in some cases, it changes it for you, I believe, and it adds an underscore, and then it's different, right? Which is just ridiculous, right? You want them to be the same, and so you know what you're doing. Also, I want to talk about the OR criteria. The OR criteria can be kind of confusing, and I illustrate that with, if you've got multiple things in criteria on one line, that is an and between those. So this would say where the quantity sold is greater than the quantity on hold, and where the quantity on hold is greater than 0. And why is that?
It must think it's text. So this is probably a query, and they didn't use a conversion function on that field, and so they didn't actually turn it into a number.
Lovely.
But I do want to tell you, Maria, it's 4 minutes till the hour.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, I guess what I'm trying to say on this one, and I will go quick here. If you were trying to put an or here, it's just really confusing because applying these and what order you are applying them in gets confusing. So I always recommend, if you're going to use an or, to switch to SQL. It's just much more readable. You can see the parentheses and you can know, perhaps you meant to always have this condition and then or another, just use your parentheses and take a look at your parentheses in the SQL view if you're going to do something like that. And then also, if you're going to do some kind of computation, you've all seen these things where you've got, again, not liking these brackets. Where you do this and you've got an expression. Always take a look at this and rename that to something readable, because that's just too hard to read and you don't know what that is.
Why don't you press Shift F2 on there, Maria, so they can really see what it says? To zoom it up, go to where, the expression 1, because I don't think you really covered that sufficiently for a beginner. So notice that Access has to give the column a name. So it creates a name called expression 1, and anything before the colon is the name of the column.
Right here. So you would change that into, whatever leftover value or whatever you want to call it, so that it can be readable. Well, we are almost at the end of our time here, and we're only halfway through our slides, so I think we're going to have to do this again and do the rest. We were thinking we would need maybe a deeper dive session anyway. To organize the follow-up for this, we'd also like to hear, what more would you like to hear about? What other items needed to be covered? Any ideas or suggestions that you have for us? And we'd be happy for you to either type in the chat or you can follow up. Eventually, this will be posted to YouTube. You can comment there or contact either one of us at these. Let me just close this out so you can see bigger here. We are going to post the whole deck for today. I think Crystal already created a link to it, didn't you, in your page? Or
well, I didn't actually put it on there yet, but I will. I have on the shortcut keys page, I will also add a link to the PowerPoint slide deck that Maria is showing.
Yeah, and it's posted at AccessUserGroups.org, and I'll put a blog entry and link to that as well on that. Any specific question on how soon will it be posted to YouTube?
Well, how soon are they going to give me the recording? I guess, Maria, that's kind of up to... I still don't have recordings. I would produce more if I had the files.
Huh. Crystal actually is generous enough, give her a huge thank you, to volunteer her time to put together the videos and edit them and put them on YouTube from the raw videos that we get from the WebEx meetings. And so thank you so much for doing that, Crystal. It's huge. I don't know how to do that. I know there's beautiful tools. What's your favorite tool?
Well, I use Camtasia. And I use Snagit a lot too, and I'm happy to show anybody that's sharing how to do it. And I've offered that to Dwayne too. If you're still connected, Dwayne, because you know a lot also.
Yeah. So it's apparently reasonably easy to use. It does, obviously, everyone does their tips and tricks on and creating videos as well. Crystal does a great job. So she's done some of our other ones. On the AccessUserGroups.org website, like if you go under one of the chapters, ours is lunch chapter, you can see links to the videos from there. And then we also have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to, and they get actually posted on there. Just the links are on the user group. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. And Crystal, big thanks to you for co-presenting today.
Thanks, Maria. It's good to be here presenting to beginning developers with you. I have one more thing I'd like to ask everybody. If there's something that we showed you that was like, wow, I'll have to remember that, what is it?
Yeah, that'd be great feedback. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. This has really been a lot of fun. And thanks, Maria. It was fun to co-present with you.
Thank you, Crystal. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Happy New Year.
To you, too.